Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I'm proud to announce a new series, Know Your Theurgist. And what better place to start than with John Opsopaus, aka Apollonius, aka Bruce MacLennan. Greetings and welcome, Apollonius. How are you?
Greetings, Hercules. I'm doing very well. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and you are someone who I'm very impressed with, as you know.
Oh,
And
thank
you're
you.
an excellent scholar, and you've dedicated your life to shedding light on mysteries that were shrouded in darkness or shadow because they were so obscure. And now we're seeing an age through the internet where this ancient information is taking root again, it's flowering again. It's a very exciting time to be alive.
Absolutely. And I mean, uh, I think people that have sort of grown up in the internet age don't realize how difficult it was sometimes to get information back back in the day before the internet, when, you maybe had to do book searches for rare and expensive books or material was circulated as fading Xerox copies or
Yes.
mimeograph copies that could barely be read, and it could be very hard to get a hold of information, and pretty much everything now is on easily found on the internet. So it is a new age in that sense.
Yes, and you've started a publishing house, which we'll get to a little later, that helps to preserve this information, and that is a fantastic thing as well. I remember those days, and I remember them fondly.
Yeah.
They were annoying when you were going through them, but now there's a certain nostalgia. And I remember coming across references in books I was reading. So writing down the book and the author or whatever other information I can get, then going to an antiquarian bookstore or to Weiser's or the Strand in New York City, which
Oh
were
yeah.
they would find your stuff more easily and less expensively than some of the antiquarian bookstores. And then waiting for months, sometimes for years.
Years.
And
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
when you finally received your book, you paid a lot of money for it. I remember spending what to me then was a phenomenal amount of money, and then sitting and reading the book and finding maybe three useful sentences and another
Right.
couple of references to track down. So the process started all over.
All over again. Well, I mean, the good part about that was, I mean, it was a sort of spiritual quest. And
Yes,
so you made the investment, in with money, but time and just energy and patience, which are all good things as part of the spiritual quest. So you did value it, and those three sentences you got out of the book were
we're a
treated very
treasure.
preciously.
Yeah, but again, I'm glad we have today. Today,
Yeah,
what the problem is that the time you had to digest this information when you're going on quests was sufficient so that you really had everything digested up until the point you got those to be able to recognize those three sentences, and have them shed light on something that was still shadowy for you. Um, but now we're bombarded with information. Sometimes it's a lot to absorb.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And in terms of what I use, I depend a lot of my work depends on traditional academic scholarship, and there's a lot more of it now,
Yes.
because some of these areas have become much more popular as areas of research. So there's new books and articles all of the time. It's just it's very hard to keep up with, and to find the really valuable stuff amongst all of the rest that which still may be valuable, but just less valuable. Our lives are only so long, and there's only so much you can read in
Fortunately.
life.
A lot of these things, for people who do astral projection or that type of work, a lot of these lost texts you find in your adventures after many years are actually there.
Hmm.
So before they started manifesting in this reality, it was possible to find these books. It wasn't always possible to retain a lot of the information you got while reading these books there.
Right.
Uh, the internet has become the new astral plane. And like
Right.
the original astral plane, so it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't real sometimes.
You
sometimes.
can't trust everything. You,
No,
that's exactly true. That's certainly true. There's a lot of interesting, and I mean, this is kind of a whole other topic, but there's a lot of interesting parallels between the internet and how it functions in our society and the astral plane.
yes.
And it's it's either a very interesting analogy or there's something deeper there.
I think
And
it's
I don't know
something,
which.
I think there's something deeper. And we have, I don't know if the theurgy conversation, but some of the conversations that I've been having over the years have touched upon that. So other people see it,
Mm.
that this is functioning pretty much like the astral plane. So it's our astral plane. And some ancient astronaut theorists would say that, basically they had this type of astral plane in antiquity, and other people who are more psychologically inclined will say that basically they had mental functions that functioned as our astral plane does, maybe in the collective unconscious, and who
Mm.
knows? But
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
interesting to think about these things. Now, you started fairly early in your life to search this information out and to create sites where other people, once the internet came to us, could go to get this information easily. And the information wasn't just full of links, it was full of your thoughts, which were invaluable.
Right. Yeah, I had I mean, I had a long-standing interest in mythology and in magic and psychology and many spiritual topics in general, things like that, really since probably sort of my middle school years, at least. And but in the 1970s, when I was in graduate school, I was very much into ancient Greek philosophy and literature, and I remember thinking to myself, "Gee, I really feel more at home with these people than my contemporaries." And later, probably around 1980 or so, I I basically said, guess what? I'm a pagan. I just sort of named it, and as many modern day pagans do, there's that sense of homecoming, and it's just you realize something that's been true for a long time, and you just state it explicitly, and that happened for me around 1980, and so and I was aware of other neo pagans that I had known, and I was aware of sort of the whole neo pagan and Wiccan kind of movement, and of course the New Age, all of the New Age stuff too. And so anyway, around that time, I said, well, okay, but my version of neo paganism is the Greek gods. Those are the gods I want to worship and interact with, and I a lot of other people at that time that were interested in the Greek gods were basically doing Wicca, but with Greek deities,
Yes.
and that's good. That's fine. I mean, and I did that too. But I thought, well, I'd really like to, uh, in some way, have a more authentic, a more deeply rooted um, Hellenic practice. And the good thing is, of course, that there's an enormous amount we know about
Mhm.
ancient Hellenic practice because it was a written culture. And and it's been studied to death because it's at the roots of European civilization. So there's a lot of information. And so that's where I really started getting into the studying the research that had been done uh, about um, many things about ancient Greek culture and in general ancient Mediterranean culture, but in particular the religious practices. And the other thing I observed was that neo-pagans that were interested in the Greek gods or the Roman gods um, were a relative minority within the whole neo-pagan community. And so I thought, well, if we're going to do group rituals and things like that, or really just reconstruct rituals and figure out how to do this stuff in a more authentic kind of way, then we need to get in contact with each other. And so around 1990, I formed an organization called the Omphalos, and named after, of course, the famous
Yes.
Eagle Stone at Delphi. And it was a networking organization for, broadly speaking, people following the Greek and Roman paths. And it operated through the postal mail. So I advertised in different magazines and things that were targeted at the pagan community, and said, if you're interested in this, send me, let me know, and I would send out sort of a questionnaire that people could return, and then I made up a database, of people and their contact information, um, and so we could, if people were in the same area and things like that, they could get together and or just communicate. And with the explicit goal of trading ideas, And so in the early 1990s, I moved the Omphalos onto the internet. And um, as I point out to people, that site is still there. It's kind of old and creaky looking because it dates from the early 1990s, but it's still there. And I had links to other people's websites at that time. And part of what I did was, you know, as we developed sort of a Hellenic practice, or a Greco-Roman practice, I would say, because there was some of the members were more interested in the Roman pantheon. We would develop ritual outlines or rituals for specific festivals and things like that, and post them. I put them up on the website so people could see them. And so that's really was the start of all of that. It was sort of my contributions to this whole project. And I had my own personal website, which I called the Bibliotheca
Mhm.
Arcana, and that's also still out there. And over the years, I put my writings up on that. And so a lot of it is, just, working my way through this stuff myself. And I figured if I did a lot of research and reached some conclusions about some of these things, uh, then, I'd make it available to other people to take it if they wanted, or to change it, or to just ignore it. And so that's really what that is then, is the accumulation of many years of doing that. And of course, in the meantime, of course, now there are various sorts of groups devoted to the Hellenic pantheon, um, with various sorts of approaches and things like that. So it's um, not needed so much anymore. I leave the information up there because I think uh, it's still useful. But um,
It's useful even from a historical point of view to show the growth of the neo-pagan Hellenism in the West again. I think I contacted you back in those days, the pre everyone has a computer days, because I remember corresponding with some of the groups, and I had a directory that I got them from. I
yeah,
was in Selena Fox's circle
Circle
organization.
Guide to Pagan Groups, I think
Yes,
it's
I
called.
used to get that,
Yeah,
and I was listed in there a few times, and also the Fellowship of Isis I belonged to for a
yeah.
while, and I think I was listed in there too. And there I was using my Americanized Greek version of Iraklis, so
Uh-huh.
so that's what it was back there. And it was very interesting. And I did correspond with several people. I think I talked to a few of them on the phone at some point. And there were a lot of wild ideas and strong opinions of floating about at the time.
Yeah, well, and of course there still are in many cases.
Yes,
But yeah, but this is, I think, to be expected when, this spiritual tradition has been broken, and it's been kind of dormant for so many centuries. And so it hasn't had sort of the natural growth that a continuous tradition would have. And so we're kind of jump starting it anew. And we don't want to do things just the way people did
right.
2,500 years ago, um because you know we're a different culture, and we've also we think we've advanced in many ways. Um, but that's still there's a lot of holes in our understanding, and then there's just different tastes about how you should go about religious practice as well. Um, and I mean, I started out basically, I thought that sort of the truest form, or the most I want to say, I hate to keep calling it authentic, but that's not right. But I thought, in some sense, the most grounded, I guess, form of the Greek religion was actually more like what you read about in Homer. So my practice was originally kind of Homeric, and that's really sort of my view of the gods, was basically the Homeric view as opposed to the more later classical view. And but over the years that's changed, and as you know, I'm more of a Neoplatonist now.
Mhm.
But um, anyway, I think even individually, we change, and
Oh, yes. And that's a good thing too. And I welcome the different perspectives because people stand in different places, they see different things, and their opinion is based on where they've stood and where they're currently, standing. Uh,
Mhm.
I see it like a great tapestry or a puzzle. And then if you talk to people who see the world differently than you do, you get startling insights that help you fill in that puzzle a little bit.
Exactly. It makes you think,
Yeah.
People says, well, people say, I don't, that idea doesn't seem right to me, or what have you. And well, and if you respect the person, and they're thoughtful, or seem to be serious about it, then you think, well, maybe they got a point. I certainly changed my mind on many specific things over the years. Um, but
Yes, as have I. And part of what helped me change my view was going beyond the Greek worldview, because I'm Greek Orthodox, or I was born Greek Orthodox. I haven't been Greek Orthodox since grammar school. But because they're proud of their culture, they taught me a lot of things, including about theurgy and theosophy. Not very much, granted, but they introduced me to the topic. And I seized on the idea that you could draw the gods down into statues or people or even yourself. And at the time, the Hercules movies were out, and Charles Atlas was very popular. So I thought, hey, maybe
yeah,
if I exercise, I could become more, godlike. And in Homer, the heroes are often compared to the gods. It's godlike Achilles, and so
absolutely. And of course, in Neoplatonism, deification is sort of the ultimate goal of the religious practice, and there's an element of that in the Greek Orthodox tradition,
yes.
um, which I was surprised. Which I wasn't very familiar with the Greek Orthodox tradition, but I was very surprised to discover that idea has persisted um, in the Greek Orthodox Church.
Two
Um,
things I found very startling about, in retrospect, but when I was growing up, they were normal, was one, that if you pointed out, if somebody, because, there are people who had anti-Italian or anti-Jewish sentiments. So they would, point out that the other group killed Jesus. And the Greek thing is, well, we killed Socrates, and that was just. So instead of blaming somebody else, take responsibility for how you killed the god. And
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
the other thing was that the past, even though it was in the past and it wasn't Christian, there was a belief that there was a special place. It might not have been in heaven, but it was near heaven, where pagans who were born in the classical era or before went, because they didn't know about Christianity, so they could all be forgiven. So they might
yeah.
as good a place in the afterlife, but they had a place that was just for, just for them. So
They had
that
to live on the other side of the tracks.
Yes, yes, and those were I learned those things growing up in a Greek Orthodox household and going to a Greek Orthodox school. So yeah, I couldn't condemn them for all their beliefs, even when I was a rebellious teenager and started to.
Yeah. Well, and I mean that's natural. I mean when you're and it's a good thing that when you're a teenager you start to think for yourself,
Yes,
and not just accept everything that you've got from your family and your community, and it's natural to rebel against it and maybe come back to it too in some form, But certainly I think that that kind of rebellion is a very, very healthy thing and should be nurtured and, you know, respected. But what you said about learning from other traditions too, I think is very important because as much as we know about the ancient Greek tradition, there are holes and things that either were just such common knowledge that nobody ever bothered to write it down, or things that, and of course, they didn't have photographs or other things that might record it in other ways. Um, and So things that were either so obvious that nobody wrote it down, or that were passed on orally, sometimes intentionally. Of course, Plato criticizes writing. That you can't have a conversation with a book in the same way that you can have a conversation or an argument with a person. And writing was criticized that it would degrade people's memories. People wouldn't be able to remember things so well because they could just write it down. And there's some truth in those criticisms, but so there's stuff that just never got into the literature, or was in the 90% that's been lost, is another thing. And so I found it very valuable in those cases to look at other traditions, some quite distant from the European traditions, because I believe that, people are the same. What we're doing in spiritual practice depends on what we are as human beings.
Right.
It depends on the cosmos. So it transcends cultures. It transcends um, particular nationalities and so forth. And not to say that that stuff isn't important, but I view a lot of the cultural manifestations of these practices as having an underlying common structure. So if you can sort of see past some of the uh, um, cultural particularities and see the common structure underneath, then you can say, oh yeah, those people, those Tibetan Buddhists or those Taoists or whatever they might be, they're doing the same things that the ancient Greeks were doing. A lot of the names are changed. There's other things that are different because it was a different culture. But especially if it's a living tradition, we can go and see, oh, yeah, that's probably the way the ancient Greeks did it too, or something parallel to that. And so I found that extremely useful. And I think I told you as one of my first interests was in mythology, and I remember in high school I got Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that was sort of my introduction to Jung. And I also had a book, I've still got it, I believe, a little paperback called Myths and Legends of All Nations. So it went through, I don't know, probably 20 different cultures and talked about, the gods and some of the, big stories about them and stuff like that. And so when you see that, you begin to see, oh yeah, there's all of these parallels. There's a lot of differences. They've all each has its own personality and character, but also you can see sort of common themes and things like that. And you begin to realize, okay, these are just different peoples expressing these things in their own way, because they have a different history or they're in a different locale or whatever it might be.
One conversation that got me in trouble with the Hellenic community during the Yahoo years, where Yahoo groups where everybody men discuss with was, I told them that if they really want to understand how Theseus's father could be both Poseidon and King Aegeus of Athens, they could study Santeria, because in Santeria you have your physical parent, then you have the god who owns your head or the goddess who owns your head, and
Mhm.
they have a role to play in your destiny. So the Santeria studies that I did helped me see very many things with mythology that were kind of puzzling or not exactly they didn't exactly click in terms of what it meant. But with the Afro-Caribbean traditions and the diaspora, I was able to, oh wow, look at that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a living tradition, you know.
Mhm.
So, I mean, you can see what people are doing. You can ask them what they're doing, you know. And so it's very valuable to have that kind of information available. But then you have to use it, sensitively and I think carefully too, because you can't just start um, importing pieces of Santeria into, say Hellenic paganism, for example. You have to, as I see, sort of translate, like a good translator, you say, what thought were they expressing? And then you re-express it in another language. And I think it's kind of the same thing. What is this cultural practice doing? And then how would that be done then in a different culture? Um,
Well, that's an issue that we could devote several episodes of our talk to, cultural appropriation, because in
hmm,
antiquity there was a different understanding. People saw themselves as bringers of culture. And I think it was called interpretatio by the Romans, and the Greeks did it too. You go somewhere, okay, who's the strong man? That's Hercules. Who's the thunder god or the father of the gods? That's Zeus. And sometimes the blended names have survived, where you have the Romanized name and then the Celtic name or whatever part of the world they came from. And sometimes these stories would find themselves in the Greek mythology. For instance, Cadmus, who founded Thebes, was a Phoenician from Tyre. And
hmm,
the Phoenicians worshipped Hercules, Melkart, and also Athena. I forgot, I don't remember what name they worshipped under. But there was a lot of the mythology of Hercules and Athena happening in Thebes. And some of that might have come from Melkart's mythology. And as Herodotus points out, Melkart was older by at least a millennium or so.
right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's true. And, you know, we kind of sort of start with Homer, and by then there's already been millennia of people interacting with each other, trading with each other, moving around, trading stories. And as you said, kind of an assumption that at least for the major gods, the high gods, you might say, they're common to everybody. So yeah, they
Yes.
have different names of different cultures, but they're basically the same gods. Different locales, this mountain or this river, whatever, may have its local god, but the high gods were universal. So yeah, and yeah, they weren't they weren't concerned about appropriation, cultural appropriation in the same sense that we are. But of course, we're concerned about it because we're in a post-colonial era,
Right. Yes, that's a good
and
point.
they were colonizers, obviously. But yeah, there's this kind of joke that the genius of the Greeks was they only stole from the best. Uh, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. They didn't care who they learned from. If it was a good idea, and that would include
They adopted it and made it there.
the alphabet, is a nice example of that. And especially in the Platonic tradition of philosophy, um, there's a very strong respect for the so-called barbarian peoples,
Hmm.
especially the Persians with the Magi or Magoi, um, as sort of the wise men and women of the Persian Empire, the Egyptians, of course, the Phoenicians. Um, Many of these different people were very highly respected, especially for their philosophy and for their religious practice. I mean, Iamblichus, basically was a Syrian. Um,
Yes.
said you Greeks are always changing everything. You got to go back and use the ancient names of the gods, the names that were handed down from the gods themselves. And it's the ancient peoples that know those names, the Egyptians and
Right.
Syrians and so on. So, especially there was an enormous amount of respect for what could be learned. And, all of the biographies of all of the ancient philosophers, and again, philosopher really means wise man in ancient Greek.
Yeah, lover of wisdom.
Lover of wisdom, exactly. Um, all of the biographies of them had them traveling, for decades all around the Mediterranean, learning at the feet of the priests in Egypt and in Phoenicia and in Persia, and even in India, and visiting all of these different people and learning their um, spiritual teachings, and then bringing them back and teaching them within the Hellenic world. So, there was the widespread recognition there that all of these different peoples, especially the old countries, the old cultures, the old races, as they might term it, had this very, very deep knowledge. And I think that's true, that there's a long history of humankind, well, before we settled down, say 10,000 years ago, something like that. Um, and then before we started writing stuff down too. And we have to think that something like that was going on before that, the shamans and the medicine people and other wise people within the different cultures um, were teaching others and learning from each other. And some of the knowledge, of course, would be kept secret and only passed on to initiates. But still, there was a program of passing the knowledge on. And there is so I'm not surprised to find, that there's common stories, for example, in many of these different cultures, even worldwide, because I think they go very, very far back.
I think so too. And I'm happy to be living in this time because we get to see what happens with comic book characters in the global culture. And if our culture collapses and our society regresses and all the things happen to become stories, like
Mm.
we spoke of earlier, the astral plane that will come about by people is describing the internet and things like that, and people hypothesizing about that, and the occurrence of really bizarrely detailed mythical characters worldwide will make sense, but not to the people there. They'll
Yeah.
also a collective unconscious or something that, and its symbolism. So it's great to see these things unfold. And also like Atlantis, I stopped really looking for Atlantis when I realized that perhaps Atlantis was a global culture like we have, and it
Mhm.
was widespread. So it didn't need to be like a separate city-state or island nation. It could have just been the influence that was common at the time. And historically, the Phoenicians did that. The Phoenicians not only spread their wares, but they spread their culture and they spread their religion and they spread their mythology. And just like now on Burger King, McDonald's, if a movie comes out, it's on it's on the cups, and there's all sorts of merchandise. All these vases and plates and things we have from antiquity were probably pretty much the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
oh, we went down and listened to the storyteller tell that story. Everyone's talking about the story, and oh look, I got a plate. Argonauts on it. Oh
Here's Hercules killing the Hydra.
yes, yes. Uh, Unfortunately, I just looked at the clock. We only have like 20 more minutes left. So I'll give you a choice. Do you want to just continue until like 10:15 or so, or would you like to schedule a part two to this? Because I think we could definitely get a part two, even a part three out of our conversation.
Well, we can keep going for a while here, whichever you like. Actually, I don't know what sort of time you had planned for this, so um, actually, it doesn't make too much difference to me. I'm happy to go on till 10:15 or something like that.
Okay, so let's do that today. And if we still have a lot to talk about, we will schedule a part two.
Sure.
Um, so you talked before about the Biblioteca and the Omphalos, and
Mhm.
they're still around, and you can still find them, but the portals to them are based on some of your most recent work rather than your older work.
Right, that's right. So my main website now is opsopaus.com, opsopaus.com, and featured pretty prominently on the web page for that is our links to the Omphalos and Bibliotheca Arcana. But that's the website where I have now my new books. Um, so my most recent two books from Llewellyn. And then also you mentioned before, I've got my own little publishing venture going, which is Pythagorean Pentagram Press. And that's basically self-publishing through Amazon, but I've used that to uh, produce some things that I don't expect to sell very well, but it's stuff that I want to make available, and I want it to just kind of stay up there where people can find it. And pretty much everything I've done under that label has been in three formats: paperback, hardback, or ebook.
Yeah.
And so, you can kind of get whichever you want. But I've so it's mostly been previous work of my own, some of the stuff from the Bibliotheca Arcana that I've published. And I did also do, in fact, it was the first thing I did. It was almost kind of an experiment, but I published Kenneth Sylvan Guthrie's Pagan Bible,
Mm.
which is a collection of classical texts about daimons and angels and other sorts of spirits like that that he had put together. And it was a really nice collection. I went to it many times to because it was easier than digging out the original source sometimes because they were all together in one place. And so I figured, well, this is useful. It's very hard to find. Um, and so I figured I'll just republish it. And it's been pretty popular actually with people. Um,
Can you list the other titles that you've published?
yeah, so let me start with well, I do have another website too I should mention before I go on, and that's wisdomofhypatia.com. And that's the website for my book called The Wisdom of Hypatia. And that was published by Llewellyn. And that teaches 3 degrees of wisdom based on the philosophies of the Hellenistic age. So basically, Epicureanism as the first degree, Stoicism as the second degree, and Neoplatonism, including Theurgy, as the third degree. Which I think is, although you don't have to do it literally, but I think it's a reasonable progression of more advanced spiritual practices. Then I've on the other website, I've got links for um, the Oracles of Apollo, which is a description of ancient Greek divination techniques, and it presents two authentic ancient Greek systems. One is the alphabet oracle, which is kind of like rune casting. But what I like to point out is whereas most rune casting is kind of conjectural because we don't actually know
Right.
how it's done in ancient times, but this we do. We've got literal stone tablets with the meanings of the letters of the Greek alphabet. So we actually know how they were interpreted for divination in the ancient world. And so I think that's quite remarkable that we actually don't have to guess um, um, how to do that. It teaches that system, and then it also teaches a divination system based on what's sometimes called the Delphic maxims or the sayings
Yes.
of the seven sages, 147 of them, very terse uh, kind of wisdom sayings from the seven sages of ancient Greece. And so you can use them for divination as well. So it teaches those two systems and how to use them. Um, then another book uh, came out last year, or maybe it was the year before. It's time's collapsing.
Yeah,
Uh,
time does fly.
it does. It's called Secret Texts of Hellenic Polytheism, and it's kind of interesting.
Mhm.
It's
To say the least.
uh,
To say the least, it's kind
to
of
say the least. Yeah, so I'll try and summarize it briefly. Um, it teaches, again, as a practical, these are practical books. It teaches the religion of George Gemistos, who called himself Plethone, who lived around 1400, 1355 maybe to 1453. Uh, so he was a Byzantine Greek, and he made this neo-pagan religion based on ancient Greek religion and on Neoplatonic philosophy. So he was doing just what modern neo-pagans are doing,
Mhm.
but he was a very smart guy. I mean, he was a very good philosopher, and he knew, ancient Greek religion and culture inside out. And so he was able to put together this religion that he practiced apparently in Mistras in Greece, um, with a small secret group, because you could literally be tortured and put to death for practicing um, paganism at that time in Greece, uh, or in Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire. So anyway, so he wrote this book. It's called Book of Laws, where he describes the practice, religious rituals, hymns for all of the gods, a sacred calendar, all of this stuff. Complete religious manual, you might say. Unfortunately, when he died, it fell into the hands of his enemy, who was
Uh,
later patriarch of the Greek Orthodox Church, and he burned large parts of it, probably about two-thirds of it. Um, but he preserved what he considered the most damning parts. Well, fortunately, that's a lot of the stuff that's most useful for us, because it was stuff like the religious rituals and the theology and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff missing that we would really like to know. But on the other hand, we've got kind of a complete manual for practicing this religion. And so what I did in my book, Secret Texts of Hellenic Polytheism, was I present it all, in a hopefully easy to understand way, including advice on how to actually do the rituals, and even how to perform the hymns musically and stuff like that. Um, and then I also include my own translations of the surviving texts from him. Uh,
yes.
the only, as far as I know, still English translations of these texts. I waited and waited and waited for someone else to do it, and finally decided I'd have to do it myself. So I did that.
And
Uh,
you did it wonderfully too.
well, thank you, thank you. It was a long and painful job. I have to say it. I've got sitting beside me uh, three uh, loose leaf notebooks filled with uh, Xeroxes of the Greek text and my notes and vocabulary notes and all sorts of other stuff, alternate translations and all sorts of stuff that as I worked through it. Um, but so those books, there's links for those books which you can get, through any sort of bookseller. Now, what I've published through Pythagorean Pentagram Press is a bilingual edition of just the surviving texts of Plethone that are related to this stuff. So that's his laws, his commentaries on the Chaldean oracles, and his book on virtues. And they're in parallel Greek and English. Um, my English, excuse me, my English translations. And so for people that, know some ancient Greek, um, technically Byzantine Greek, but basically it's ancient Greek, and want to compare it or check my translations, or if they doubt my translations, or anything like that, those are available. And I just thought that needed to be the case, uh, um, because again, even the Greek text, the oldest Greek, or the only current Greek text for the laws is from the 19th century. I forget the date exactly. I think it's like 1847. So again, you can find it online in a really kind of crummy looking scan, which is sometimes quite hard to read, with a French translation. And that's kind of the only one that's available. So, and there have been a few new pages of his text discovered since that edition was printed. So my edition has, it's not an edition in the sense of a critical or scholarly edition, but my edition has that new, relatively new text. It was found in the 1960s, I believe. Um, and it has all of the Greek text in the proper order, and then my translations. So that's one of the things that I published. Um,
And
I
you
also,
published a book on a spiritual journey, on an ancient spiritual journey.
yes. So I did a translation. This was something I started many years ago. I did a translation of Kebe's tablet, which it's a fairly well-known text. It used to be quite popular, but it kind of dropped out of popularity in the 20th century. But it's a very interesting text because it's one of these stories within a story within a story. And the story is that, they come up, some travelers come upon this tablet mounted in an ancient temple to Poseidon, and they're trying to figure out what all there's pictures on it, and they're trying to figure out what the pictures mean. And of course, an old man comes up and he says, I was here, and and so he then proceeds to explain to them the whole symbolic meaning of this tablet. And it's about the journey to wisdom, really, the journey through life and the journey to wisdom. And so he explains all of the allegorical meaning for the things. And so it's a kind of interesting Greek text. It's not too difficult Greek, and I kind of translated it as practice a long time ago, and like literally decades ago. And one of the things I was interested in, though, is that because this used to be a popular text, several different people have illustrated it. They've tried to recreate the ancient tablet that's described. Um, and we do have, or we had, it's been lost, we had a piece of an ancient tablet that actually fits the description
Oh,
very
wow.
accurate. Yeah, yeah. So there's drawings of this piece of tablet that has since gone missing. Um, but no photographs or anything, but there are some decent drawings of it from I think the 18th century. But anyway, um, other people have illustrated, in particular Hans Holbein, the younger, illustrated, used it as borders for a title page of a book. And so I started pulling out pieces of this and coloring them digitally to make illustrations for the different parts of this story of the Tablet of Kebes. And like I said, I'd started this decades ago, put it aside, worked on all sorts of other things, and finally decided, well, this really, I should finish this up. So I did that, and I published a little book. And so it's just the text of the English translation, my English translation of the Tablet of Kebes, but illustrated with these figures from Hans Holbein that I've colored. And it looks a lot like a tarot deck,
Yes,
frankly.
it
You know,
does.
and I even thought about making a set of cards, and maybe I'll do that someday. But yeah, it looks a lot like a tarot deck, and that's one of the things I liked about it.
You
So
anticipated my next question. I was going to talk about, in addition to the Oracles of Apollo, you've also published a Pythagorean deck of cards and booklet, and you are working on a new divinatory tool, most recently based on mythic themes and popular culture.
that's right. So well, I'm not sure about you'll have I'm not sure what you're referring to in the last one, but let me talk first about the Pythagorean tarot. So that project developed in the 1990s, and it actually developed out of a discussion list that a number of us were participating in. And we started writing our interpretations of different tarot cards. And I wrote these, you know, quite long interpretations, and also in the process described in words new images for all of the tarot cards. And so I started, doing, a very traditional esoteric practice, as you know, from the Golden Dawn and the Builders of the Adytum and other esoteric orders at
I
some
remember the
stage.
Buddhist that died. I remember them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're still around, I think.
Are they?
Yeah. Um, but at a certain stage in your sort of initiatory progress, you make your own tarot deck. And in the Boda deck, you just color it. But the Golden Dawn, you would actually draw your own deck based on a model, and color it in. And so I've always thought that was a good practice. If you work with the tarot, at least, it's a good practice because you have to develop your own understanding of it, your own interpretations. And so at some stage, it makes sense to make your own deck that reflects your understanding. And of course, that'll change, because as your
Yes.
understanding changes. So I did that. So I made my own tarot deck. Uh, I'm not an artist, but I drew my own images and colored them in, and I had my own tarot deck. So I put my um, interpretations in the Bibliotheca Arcana. I put them online, and again, they're still out there too, with my own images, and for anybody who was interested to see them. And people kept writing to me and saying, this is really interesting. I really like this. Where can I get the deck? So, so I approached Llewellyn, and they published the book, and it's a quite hefty book. It was, I don't know, 400 or 500 pages with lots of footnotes, and the deck in 2001, and uh, it was in print for a decade or so, and then went out of print. So I can't say it was a really popular seller, but you know um, it was out there for a while. So anyway, it went out of print, and I thought, okay, I got the rights back on it, and I said, I'll one of these days I'll do a second edition of the books, and that's what I did now. So Pythagorean Pentagram Press has published the books, but what I decided to do for the second edition, there was a lot of art that I referred to in the first book, um, that were, for instance, models for some of my cards or inspirations in some way, or that I was talking about alchemical symbols, things like that, that weren't in the original Llewellyn book. So I said, I'm going to do an edition of this that has all of those images in it. And it's also going to be in color. So you can see the cards in color and some of these images in color. So I published, I produced, and again, this was something I had started probably 10 years ago and put aside. And I figured, okay, now I've got this press, so to speak. I'm gonna actually finish this up. So I made the second edition, not too different from the first edition, just updated a little bit here and there, but with a lot more images in color. So it's expensive because it's a color book.
Mhm.
Um, and the paperback is about 700 pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's got all of these images, and they're fairly large, and all of the text. I included some appendices that didn't go into the original book. I had them on the website, but I put them into the new edition. It turns out that the hardback, that's actually 700 pages was too much, or for Amazon's hardbound publishing system. So I had to actually do the hardbound in 2 volumes. So one volume is the major arcana, and the other volume is the minor arcana. Um, so they're quite expensive. I don't know. I don't remember exactly. I think maybe the paperback is 60 some odd dollars or something, and maybe it's around 100 or something for the others. Um, but they have these. It's a much richer kind of
Mhm.
experience. And Now, no cards though, and people continually keep writing to me and saying, "Do you plan to republish the cards?" I just had another email yesterday, somebody saying, "What about the cards?" And so I think I will probably explore that, and you know, again, just so that they're available because there's not a huge demand for them, but there's a steady demand,
And
and
there's a need for them.
yeah, well, of course, and it's that was the original thing basically when I first did it, you had to make your own cards. That was the only way you could use my cards uh, for divination. Um, yeah, so we'll see, we'll see. That's a whole other thing, of course, figuring out how to do that, and I just haven't had a chance to learn about that.
People are doing cards more on Etsy. So maybe somebody who sells on Etsy would be able to shed some light on that.
That's a good suggestion. I know I have talked to a couple people at Pantheacon when I was there, that people who had done their own cards or were planning to do their own cards, and I had talked to them a little bit about that. It's much more feasible now than it was, you know, 10 or 20 years ago.
Yes.
So, uh, yeah, we'll see. Um, So what else? So I also have a commentary on the
Uh-huh.
tablet database, um, which tries to reveal all of the symbolic meaning. And there's actually several levels of meaning to that text. There's sort of a Stoic level of meaning, and then there's a deeper meaning based on the mysteries. Um, and so I've tried to explain the deeper symbolism in that. That's also a little color book because I put in a bunch of actually some AI generated images that I created for that book, in addition to the Hans Holbein images. And so and it includes the text of the tablet of Kebes as well. So it's sort of a more complete one. So um, for people that want to sort of get into the meaning of it, that's available. Um,
Helped evolve these works as well. So you become part of their history now, because what survived, you took and you brought it back to life, and other people get to experience it. And as with all things, some of those people will seek out the originals for themselves and see what they can do. But the understanding that you've added to these artifacts, that will live on through your work.
I hope so. I hope so, and I hope it helps people. I mean, it helps them both spiritually in terms of providing a practice or helping them in their whatever their practice may be, and also contributing to the literature too. That's what I hope.
The only other activity of yours that I know about that's related to the Hellenic material is you are also a speaker and you speak extensively at different types of gatherings.
I try to. So not quite so much anymore. I'm more online now, but um, I try to go to several of the national meetings that are Wicca and pagan focused, and talk about um, Pythagoreanism, talk about theurgy, talk about Hellenic religion more generally, and some other topics like that. Um, I've done a talk on the tablet of Kebes actually, and so I went to Pantheacon for a number of years. It's they've that conference has come to an end now, but for many years I went to Pantheacon, and sometimes gave one or two talks there. I'm still going to Mystic South, which is in Atlanta, every summer, and I've been doing WitchCon presentations lately, and I do some academic presentations too on some of these topics. So yeah, I feel like I try and again, not so much say this is the way you have to do it or this is what you have to believe, but this is what I've found by a combination of my more academic type of research, and also my own personal experience, and hopefully some insights into these things, and pass it on. And again, I especially in my written work, I try and make very clear this is what I've got some uh, scholarly background for. Here's the references and stuff like that. Uh, Here, we don't know. Scholars don't know, or they're in disagreement. This is my opinion. I think this
Mhm.
works for these reasons. And so people can look at it and say, okay, yeah, well, I don't agree. I think you got it wrong there, and they can do something different. Um, or they can disagree, of course, with the scholars too, but at least they know that they're going against, sort of the current scholarly opinion about whatever it may be. So I try and do that because, again, I certainly don't think that I know all of this stuff. There's lots of doubts, and I'm just trying to bring forward what I think I know, and why I think I know it, and then let people make their own decision after that. I think that's all we can do.
And I applaud that because that is very honest, and even scholarship goes in and out of fashion. I mean, I remember
Oh
when
yeah,
Jim Harrison was
yeah,
what it was all about in the material, and then Burkert, when Burkert came out, that's what it was about.
yeah.
And again, they don't agree with each other on very many things, but I like some things in Harrison that help me see things wider, and I like some things in Burkett that help me see things differently. So I value those works, and even though their opinions are no longer considered valid, their thought process and the way they connected the dots, based on what they saw, were transformative. So I treasure those books still on my bookshelf.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is too that some of these people some of these scholars that we're talking about, especially the older ones, they had very deep insights into these things,
Mhm.
you know, and sometimes they got it right, even though later scholarship, uh, found, problems or picked them apart for various reasons. I mean, one of the classic examples of this is Thomas Taylor, you know, the
Yeah.
so-called English Platonist or the English pagan, wrote in the 18th century. Um, you know, until very recently, he had produced often the only English translation of
Yes.
the Neoplatonic works, and people said, "Oh, he's kind of crazy." He was his understanding was Greek wasn't very good. He would bring in all of this other Neoplatonic material, and of course, they thought he was kind of crazy anyway because he was a pagan, a practicing pagan, and um, but first of all, he was very influential, especially in the United States on the Transcendentalist movement, and in England and the U.S. and the Romantic movement, uh, and in many other respects. So he was very influential. So he's important in that perspective. But because he was he was a Neoplatonist, he had very deep insights into things. And when he often guessed right, you know, and if he guessed wrong, sometimes he guessed better than what the original was, So people still find his work very valuable, even though in terms of scholarship, it's it's way out of date. Um, but yeah. So, and I just heard a talk just a couple of days ago, and it was there was kind of an argument among some scholars, um, about some of the Neoplatonist interpretation of Plato's Parmenides, you know, and because one view is that this is basically a work about logic, that's really the foundations of Western logic. And the other is no, it's a Neoplatonic thing about the one, the ineffable one, and the different hypotheses within the Parmenides present different versions or different perspectives on the one. And I would say the older view, older now, is the idea that it was logical, because this was when there was this sort of hyper logical interpretation of ancient Greek philosophy that philosophy is all about logic, and the ancient Greek philosophers founded philosophy. Therefore, what they were doing was logic in some form. It was all about logic. Plato was all about logic and epistemology, and all of the other philosophers, Aristotle was as well, and so forth. Well, the Neoplatonists, of course, didn't interpret it that way. They were taught, said that they're basically doing theology. They were talking about the gods and about the immaterial realm and things like that. And this sort of post-Enlightenment through first half of the 20th century view was, oh, no, 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 that's not philosophy. Philosophy is all about logic and epistemology and ontology and all that stuff. Well, you know, um, now as people have begun to realize the value in the Neoplatonic philosophy, both in itself, I would say, but also in terms of the history of philosophy and in the history of thought, um, they're saying, those Neoplatonists actually, this was a valid way of understanding the Parmenides. And we need to understand how they were reading the Parmenides in this more theological kind of way. And so you see, different generations of scholars, sort of the
Yes.
older, more logical view, and I would say now the newer, but also in a sense more ancient, uh, more spiritual view of how the Parmenides should be interpreted. So yeah, it goes on. That's what it's all about, I think. Um, but I think, it took people that were sensitive to Neoplatonism and the Neoplatonic way of looking at things to be able to really appreciate how you could read the Parmenides in that way, as the ancient Neoplatonists did. And for at least one generation, maybe several generations of philosophers, they just couldn't see reading any of Plato's dialogues that way. They'd say, no, that's misreading it. Well, it may be misreading it. In other words, it may not be the way what Plato was intending to do, but nevertheless, that was the way they were read, and that was the way it
Yes.
influenced,
They influenced the
Plato.
world.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
Robert Graves is another example, like Thomas Taylor was. He brought artistic, an artistic viewpoint, and a lot of his stuff could be considered fictional now. But it again, the insights that are in Robert Graves, especially in his collections of the Greek myths, I
Mhm.
don't know how I could have gotten those insights anywhere or otherwise. Than the way that Robert Graves presented them. So I'm very grateful for them. And
Yeah,
again, folks can say whatever they want critically about him. I got something out of him, so he's one of my mentors in a sense. We're going to have
excellent.
to do a part two because
Okay.
it's also going to
Yeah,
have to.
I guess so.
I didn't ask. I really wanted to explore um, like your thoughts on how you wanted your work to evolve because we live in a computer age, an age of information, an age of Hermes, and you've already taken advantage of the tools to help this ancient lore be seen and survive. So I wanted to devote some time to talking about that. So would it be fine with you if we started there next time?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And how can people find you? You listed a few ways, but there are others if they want to learn more about you.
Well, so again, the best ways are probably the websites, opsopaus.com, opsopaus.com, and wisdomofhypatia.com. Wisdom of Hypatia is all one word. And on those websites, there's information about the books. There's study guides actually for the Wisdom of Hypatia, and information about talks I'm giving. I've got to actually update those websites in the next couple days, um, and various sorts of news and links to talks and stuff like that. Um, and you can email me through those websites as well. And so I that's probably the most reliable way to get a hold of me. And I'm happy to hear from anybody and try and answer questions or whatever else. I am both. I'm on Facebook, uh, John Opsopaus, um, and so you can. And I'm pretty sure I'm the only one with that name on
You are.
Facebook. And um, So you can contact me that way too, but I have to say I'm not really good on Facebook or Messenger, so I'm just not on it often enough. So email's probably better. And I'm happy to hear from anybody and answer questions or anything else.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Oh, and don't forget to mention, obviously
Oh,
your
yes, so we have Living Theurgy, which is currently under the umbrella of Theurgia, esoteric practices. And this show will be part of that series. And I was going to ask him privately, but I'll ask him publicly to finish up the show. If you ever want to do a special show and interview people or just talk yourself, because you're capable of carrying like at least an hour, just sharing your information, please let me know. I'd be very honored to record that for you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's a great offer. I appreciate that.
And thanks to everybody who tuned in. Until next time, this is us wishing you joyous journeys, amazing adventures, and seek out Apollonius's books. They're treasures, and we live in a time when they can be easily accessed and enjoyed. So that in itself, in the history of our history, is a phenomenally great thing. So let's take advantage of it. Good night, everybody.
Night.